Thank you for joining us. Sorry about the delay, we're just letting a few people log in first. Welcome to our third and final webinar. Thank you to those that have joined for each one so far. I hope you've taken a lot from these sessions at the moment. So we have another special guest today, and I'll let Kathy introduce him.
Thanks, Darci. Well, welcome everyone. Great to be here again. I'm very excited on this Friday morning, but also a bit sad. This is going to be the last of our third in this series. I would like to start, before I introduce our special guest, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we come to the webinar and pay my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. It is indeed a very special and quite exciting webinar. We are joined by an absolute legend in the area of inclusion and diversity, and certainly one of my good friends, but also most importantly one of my mentors, Peter Downs, who is the manager of Play by the Rules. Pete, thanks so much for joining us today. This is going to be really exciting.
I hope so.
It always is. It always is. Yeah, we are lucky because Pete is a legend and very, very busy, and he's certainly elected to give us his time today and on the practice webinar yesterday and a couple of weeks before. So thanks again for that, Pete. And we can't wait to hear the pearls of wisdom that came out of the eight series think tank for Play by the Rules. So 8 lessons from eight think tanks. Which will be great. But look, let's recap first. I notice a number of you are coming from bowls clubs that have already submitted action plans, which is fantastic. Darci, can we please have some PowerPoints, and we'll go just quickly recap on what the point of the 3 sessions were. So obviously, for me, it's all about, it's great that we see you every couple of weeks or monthly. And it's great that we're having a chat and we're getting some fantastic feedback, so thank you. But the most important thing to us is that there's actually some stuff that comes out as a result of this, so that, you know, we are putting you or helping you to be in a better place to be able to include a more diverse range of people at your bowls club. So that's what it's all about, and Bowls Victoria are backing that in terms of there's a very, very, very simple action plan. So it's really just, you know, 2 or 3 columns. You write 2 or 3 things in each column and submit that action plan to Bowls Vic by 24th and go into the draw for a set of Taylor bowls, which is great. I am negotiating with Tony Sherrill to see if I can actually enter that competition as well. But let's quickly go through that because I do want to show you exactly how simple it is, and I want to also big shout out to 2 bowls clubs that have given us permission to use their examples as well. So really love the fact that everyone is so into it. And sorry, Tony Sherrill has just told me that there's no chance I can enter the competition as well. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so let's just have a quick look at the PowerPoints on screen. So we've got, sorry, can I go back to the last one, Darci? Sorry, so this is the template that you guys have got. It's very, very simple. So it's really just what are the issues at your club in terms of inclusion and diversity, and what are the possible ideas that have come out not only from our conversations, but it also might be things that you've started to talk about with other club members, or indeed it might even be family members or other people, other community members. And then what are some action points that come out of that? So just really simple things we're after. And those action points, again, are the ones that you then take. If you need some more help with them, you take to BV or the regional bowls managers to, you know, to be able to really action them. So really, really simple. All you have to do is just fill out that sheet, shoot it through to Darci, and be in the run for the winning those bowls, which is great. Let's have a look at 2 as an example, and every action plan is going to be completely different. Let me just shout out that. But we definitely have to say a huge thanks to Werribee Bowls Club for sharing this. And this is obviously an initial plan that was done after the very first webinar. How keen are you guys? Oh my goodness. Fantastic. So some of the things that they've got down are really simple things. So just to increase the amount of meetings that they have in terms of a fundraising effort, contacting local people about, local contractors and caterers around adding some meals and some more diverse ways to attract other people in the community to the bowls club. Maybe putting some more equipment in there, like pool tables, darts boards, that sort of thing. And also looking at having, which is great, so looking at contacting kindergartens or certainly some maternal health places in terms of having some mums and bubs or bowling with babies sorts of things going on. So looking at seeing if we can have a bit of a babysitter. So look, again, all ideas to be thrown around, but great examples of how to include certainly a more diverse group of people at your club. Darci, can I have a look at the ideas from the next bowling club, which is Vermont South, which is great. And thanks again. So haven't used a table, just put their ideas down again, but what they want to do is really look at the regional, have a meeting with the regional bowls manager for some help in terms of looking through some of the things that they need to do. So looking at the fact that they do need to widen their membership base and really bring the committee on board with this as well. So looking at having some younger people on the committee as well as members, and then looking, the plan was actually quite complex, but there's just a little snapshot there of the things that they're looking at doing, which is great. So it's just different ways of doing it, doesn't really matter. But as we say in sport, as long as you write stuff down, it usually gets done. So that's what it's about, writing stuff down, writing your action plan from these 3 seminars down. So Darci, I'm going to, if you could just take that off and we put Pete on the screen, I'm going to throw over to the unbelievable, lovely Peter Downs now. And so he is a current manager of Play by the Rules, as I mentioned before, but former manager of the Disability Sport Unit at Sport Australia. It was called Australian Sports Commission. And as I mentioned before, he's a legend in the area. He certainly is the co-founder of the Inclusion Club as well, which is something to look out for. You can have a little search on the web. And he's everyone that's been around for 1,000 years like me, he's our go-to man in terms of asking any ideas or advice. So it is with that introduction, which is incredibly long but so true. I could go on forever, Pete. Thank you for joining us today, and I can't wait to hear about your 8 lessons from 8 think tanks in terms of the Play by Rules.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everyone, and hello. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite as well. It's always a great pleasure to do stuff like this. So thanks very much. If you're not aware, I'll do 1 minute on Play by the Rules, just so you're aware of the resources and what's available on Play by the Rules. It's a unique thing, Play by the Rules. It's a collaboration between 20 different state and federal government agencies, including the new Sport Integrity Australia, Sport Australia, Australian Human Rights Commission, all the state departments of sport and rec, equal opportunity commissions, Office of Children's Guardian. You can tell I've said that a few times, so I know all the partners. But it is truly unique. Although it's backed by government, we enjoy a good deal of independence from that, and flexibility. So trust me, as Kathy said, I was with Sports Commission for a long time, and Play by the Rules has a lot more freedom and independence from that. I report to a management committee that is a compilation of those agencies. So it's a really unique thing. Our thing is around safe, fair and inclusive sport. So things from child protection and child safety through to member protection, complaint handling, and inclusion and diversity is a core part of that. So that's, have a look on playbytherules.net.au. There's a whole mass of free resources and education materials and training that you can get access for free if you don't know about it. So do check that out. Now, recently, as a pivot is a good word, isn't it? We pivoted when COVID hit. There was this sort of lull period when it kind of went silent, and we had some decisions to make at Play by the Rules, and so we pivoted and took on a number of new initiatives. And one of those, which is what I wanted to talk about today and to go through a little bit, and please, make comments, ask questions. Kathy, as usual, is going to interrupt me and ask questions as we go and comments. And I really want to hear what you have to say. And I've tried to summarize the content of 8 what we call think tanks, which were basically online sessions, live stream sessions that we put out there, where we invited some special guests, experts and very experienced people in different fields of safe, fair and inclusive sport to talk about the impact of COVID and what they think are some of the important things to come out of that for community sport there. So I just want to I'll give it a go at summarizing some of those key points. All of the transcripts and the videos are on Play by the Rules, so you can see the entire things if you go there. So I've tried to just pick out some things that I think are themes that went through. Think Tank 1 was with Paul Kennedy, ABC journalist, and Dr. Bridie O'Donnell from the Office of Sport and Recreation for Women and Girls in Victoria. And they talked about the importance of remaining connected to your local community connections there. Paul was very practical in his approach as usual. He talked about looking at different membership types of models, given the impact of COVID on things like finance and the local economy. He talked about retaining contact with sponsors. Sponsors are suffering and have cutbacks too in this period. So retaining their contact with sponsors was an important thing. The importance of community connections that they both talked about in this period was something that I said, in this period of all periods, this is the time to remain connected to the community, even though it's one of the most challenging. And over the past few months, I've seen countless examples, and I'm sure you've done it as well, countless examples of how community sport has done that brilliantly well and adapted and pivoted in a way to remain connected to their community. The practical resource that I'll point you to here, it's okay to say that, but some of the local communities, haven't had the same types of information and resources that kind of mainstream, I hate that word, but mainstream Australia has had. So I point you in the direction of some resources produced recently by Inclusive Sport South Australia and Inclusive Sport Australia. Really good, accessible communication materials. So they've produced a lot of the COVID information in accessible format for different community groups. There's a link to that on Play by the Rules, but if you look up Inclusive Sport Australia, you'll be able to find those too. So the accessible communication materials are the sorts of practical tools that Paul and Bridie were talking about that are really important in this time to make that connection to community. Okay, and you'll see there's some themes that come out throughout these think tanks. Think Tank 2 was with Margot Foster, which I'm sure some of you would know. Margot is expert in the governance area, and I'll try and I think I've got a quote from here. She added that the requirements on committees is a challenge, but diversity at the governance level will make a big difference to the decisions that are made now and in the future. If clubs are to come out of COVID-19 and prosper, then diversity of thoughts and ideas at the committee level is vital. And that's to quote Margot directly, and she talked quite a lot about the importance of ensuring that now is probably more important than ever to have that diversity of thoughts and ideas at that committee level now, because the sorts of decisions we have to make, we've never made those kind of decisions. We never faced this predicament before. So diversity of thought is even more important in getting through it in that way. She looked at the return to sport in terms of practical tools, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. The Return to Sport Toolkit that was put out by Sport Australia a little while ago. That has things like simplified and more complex checklists that can be used. In my opinion, they're very good and they can be adapted. The simplified checklist can be quite quickly adapted to your own context, because the problem about producing a national resource is always that, and it's a national resource and it doesn't apply to local context. But to be honest, if you look at the simplified checklist, it's not a work of, it's not a rocket science to be able to adapt that to your circumstance. It gives you a starting point, I think, to it. So check that out. There's also a lot of practical stuff put together mostly by people like Margot on Play by the Rules. So if you look at the governance section on Play by the Rules, there's some real practical things that will help you get through this kind of period, because you need to make quick decisions, and committees are not very good at quick decisions in that way, quick and fast decisions in new areas that we haven't looked at before. So Margot's got some really good tips, and there's some good tips for committees and setting up AGMs and running AGMs online and things like that as well, which I've had part of. So check that out. Think Tank 3 and Think Tank 4, I'm going to combine a little bit. Think Tank 3, I worked with the Pride in Sport and Proud to Play guys looking around the inclusion of LGBTQ people in sport. One of the issues that have arisen during this COVID period is the effect on this whole period on the mental wellness, increases in anxiety and depression as well. Both these think tanks, Think Tank 4 was around management of risk and disease. It was Professor 𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗪𝗃, who talked about gender equity, but she also talked about the effect of this period around mental health. And I'm sure you've come across lots of discussion and discourse around the issue of mental health and mental well-being during this period. If you're okay, some of the lessons that came out of that, it sounds a bit preachy, but this was something that came out of it. If you're okay, don't assume that everybody else is, because they might not be. Everyone's different contexts and circumstances. There are some practical resources out there. There is evidence that this is happening, that there is clear evidence now that it's had a really poor effect on mental health, and the lack of sport, or this uncertainty period of going back to sport, is exacerbating that, is making it worse. So one of the resources that came out recently, a very practical one, which I'd really want to encourage you to have a look at, is the Hey Sport, Are You Okay? Are You Okay Day is on the 10th of September. So it's good timing in that way. Have a look at the Hey Sport, Are You Okay? And so you go to Are You Okay? There will be, not at the moment, a link on Play by the Rules too, to that. But they've got some real practical stuff, including posters, social media collateral, checklists, coaching resources, so that you're able to know what to ask and know the signs to look out for. Very, very practical. Developed for sport by the Are You Okay people. Have a look at that. They're very, very good practical resources. I'll quote Dr. 𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗪𝗃 that kind of sums up a theme of these two think tanks really well. And she said, if we only focus on managing the risk of disease, we face the risk of exacerbating inequalities and potentially worsening emotional well-being. And that is certainly a lot of feedback that I've got over the last few months, that there's this rush to get back to playing, this avalanche of things we have to do now, new requirements placed on us, and there's actually a potential to not ignore, but to bypass this issue of mental well-being. And it's actually really important not to do that right now. That was the key message. Simone also pointed people out to have a look at the National Mental Health Wellbeing Pandemic Response Plan, which is a very long title, but it's quite heavy going, but it's worth to have a look at if this issue really concerns you, which I guess it should. So it's the National Mental Health Wellbeing Pandemic Response Plan here. There was also mention there of increasing issues of things like racism and homophobia during this period too. It was interesting, the case the last few days of Elijah Taylor, the AFL footballer, young fella who breached the COVID protocols, has copped a season ban. I think it's for the end of the season there for going out at a time. But young Indigenous footballer who copped a lot of racial abuse online as a result of his actions there, which is not the crime of the century. He went out with his girlfriend during the COVID period. He's copped the ban, but the racist abuse that he copped because of that was terrible. Was a terrible outcome from that. And the irony of it is he wears the number 27 shirt, which was Adam Goodes' number, which we all know what happened there. So be aware of this sort of thing, that this period of uncertainty and change can lead to issues like this being exaggerated, and things like that can happen. On the flip side, the more positive side, we've seen some really interesting and great stuff happening. And I'm sure you might have seen the Essendon women's football club recently, who learnt Auslan for the team song for one of their players who are deaf, and sang the Auslan, the team song in Auslan to her, which was a fantastic, simple action of inclusion, and that the Essendon women's team as well. So there's been plenty of good examples as well of things that can be done. Think Tank 5, I'm up to. Have we got any good questions or comments coming in? Kathy, I'm just rambling on here.
No, they're not coming, and I think they're just formulating in people's minds, actually. So keep chatting for another 5 minutes or so, and we can certainly then go to questions. There might be a prize for questions just quietly to those listeners. So.
Oh, okay. Is there a prize for answers?
No.
Oh.
Sorry. Think Tank 5.
Think Tank 5. I'll stick to the script, yeah. Think Tank 5 was with Kate Corkery and Ian Roy from Sport Australia, talking about that return to sport toolkit. And they made a couple of really interesting comments that I've pulled out. One was, we only have one shot at getting this right. And if you go into it full bore. I don't quite agree with that. Well, I think we'll get lots of chances of getting this right over time, and we're all learning in this process. But they talked about some of the responsibilities of things like the COVID safe officer. I don't know if malls have got COVID safe officers engaged with people with that responsibility. One of the issues that came out of that was the legal liability of COVID safe officers. What if something happens, and where's the liability lie? Well, there's no difference really, as far as I understand, with that. That rests with the club to take all reasonable precautions and duty of care and those sorts of things. So there wasn't too many issues that came with that. But check out the Return to Sport toolkit. It is, like I say, it is very comprehensive, worth checking out. It's geared towards, to be honest, national bodies as opposed to local ones. But I'm sure you will put your local lens on that, your contextual lens on it, and use what you can use out of it. You don't have to take it all 100% as it is there. Think Tank 6 was around child safety, and we had Professor Daryl Higgins, Russell Douglas, and Brooke Irvin from gymnastics. Russell and Daryl are from the Institute of Child Protection Studies. Very fascinating and think tank, this one around child safety. And they key point that they raised was that there is evidence that children and young people are more at risk now post COVID-19, because during isolation and lockdown there's been an increase in vulnerability, and hence the predisposition of predators to target those most vulnerable. Now, without getting to that too much, this has created potentially vulnerable situations for young people during this period. And that's the type of environment where child safety awareness should be at its highest, where there are vulnerable situations. So it can leave some young people vulnerable in this situation. So be aware of that. I think it's awareness and talk about it. The action that they promoted most was to make this an issue to talk about. Is there an issue? There may well not be one, but make sure to talk about it, and it becomes part of the consciousness of the club that this is a vulnerable situation, and we're not all equal in terms of our vulnerability. You may not feel vulnerable, your kids, you may think, I'm not vulnerable, it's all safe. but talk about it, because that's the whole, what the Royal Commission really emphasised was that vulnerability is often invisible to most people, and we don't see it. It's not there right in front of us until it's too late. And so talk about the issues of vulnerability of young people there. Think about, are there any additional risk factors because of the current situation that you need to think about? There will be. I can almost guarantee there will be additional risk factors that probably you need to think about and be aware of at this stage there. So have a look at, it's not a question of policies and codes, they're all retrospective. Think about, be proactive with this and get on the front foot and saying, okay, what are some of the things that we can do? What do we have to be aware of? Are there increased vulnerabilities? And that was one of their key messages. Think Tank 7, again, it's starting to sound a bit depressing, isn't it? But it's not. It's not really. I think these are important issues. Was with Patty Kinnersley, who's the CEO of 𝗪𝗋𝗋. Yet again, there have been some disturbing reports and evidence around increases in domestic violence during this period of lockdown too. Again, something that is often invisible to people, but very present. And Patty was very strong in saying, do the simple things. Do be aware that there can be these situations, that sport has a responsibility here. That was one of the questions we had, that why is sport responsible here? Well, sport's part of society. We're all responsible for it. It's part of where we live and who we are, and sport is part of all that. So there's no abdication of responsibility there. So she said, do the small things, do the little things, look at equal funding, look at equal recognition, look at equal representation. If you're working on changing the culture and gender equity, then you are working against domestic violence and you're working against those issues too. And that's the foundation of, tackling issues of domestic violence. Is gender equity is the foundation of that. So make that part of the discussion as well, and start to do those simple little things that promote gender equity. And in that way, you'll be tackling issues such as domestic violence in the long term. And again, I encourage you to have a look at all these. There's lots of pearls of wisdom. I'm trying to pull out one or two things, but have a look at the whole recordings that are on and the transcripts that are on Play by the Rules. Finally, Lynn Anderson, who's the CEO of Paralympics Australia. This was a really interesting one for me, particularly with my background in that area. And Lynn, quite rightly, pointed out that although there's been certainly major challenges for people with disability and athletes with disability, with the postponement of Tokyo and everything else going, what happens there. Athletes with disabilities, people with disabilities are incredibly adaptable and adapt and modify. This is their life is about adapting and modifying quite often. So in many ways, they've adapted and modified to this environment better than a lot of other people in terms of the athletes have done that. I'm not talking about people with disabilities generally. I'm talking more athletes and people involved in sport. They've adapted and modified to this, and you only have to go on to some of the resources that Paralympic Australia have done, some of the actions that people like Wheelchair Sports New South Wales, who have almost daily Zoom casts and webinars around particular issues to stay connected to their community, including the design of training programs and fitness programs and exercise things, updates on what's happening with the games. It was just full on, which was amazing, which is really, really good. So they've really promoted a very positive, proactive approach to supporting their people in this period. And I believe that's worked pretty well. That's worked very well there. In terms of some of the lessons that she brought out of that, one of them was make change, but take time to sit down and talk to your people with disability about that. Because once again, the people are not equal in terms of their vulnerability. You don't often know what's going behind closed doors or how the problems people are having. Take time to talk about that and to understand some of the vulnerabilities that could be there. Do they have concerns around the return to sport? What changes do they think can be made? Take their advice, take their take their advice around what they know about adapting and modifying. They know some of the requirements. So talk to people with disability about that. Again, it doesn't have to be rocket science in that way. So that's your best source of information are people themselves, but you've got to talk to them about that. Those were, like I say, have a look at all the recordings and the transcripts, because there are multiple pearls of wisdom and good advice just in that series alone. So I really encourage you. I've also combined some of the Vic Sport and the Office of Sport New South Wales. Yep. They did a Timeout Talks series, which is pretty similar type of thing, inviting people to talk about particular issues. And I've got a number of those integrated onto the page and play by the rules too. So have a look at all that. There's a wealth of information and resources there to help.
Pete, thanks for that. It was great reliving those think tanks, because I was on most of them, and I did love them. I think one of the standouts for me was the last one with Linda Anderson, and when she was talking about the repositioning of her organisation in COVID, she was always talking about. She always started with something that had happened, like obviously having to lay off staff, but then came back with, well, what was the opportunity? And I left that that particular webinar thinking, right, okay, let's go. Like, I was actually kind of positive about lockdown and all the liberties that we've lost. And I guess that was the thing too, is that it is about attitude, isn't it? It is about kind of, and it's hard. Attitude is often hard too, to reposition yourself, to think, oh, how are we going to do this differently? How can we be a bit more positive about things? How can we look at this as an opportunity, not a threat? But sometimes it does also come down to attitude, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And you got that feeling all the way through the think tanks in any a situation like this. Not that we've all faced it before or anything, but we have faced downturns before. I remember Kathy, you'd remember too, there was a tremendous high around 2000. And I wouldn't call it, you can't really compare that to a pandemic, but in terms of what happened, sport was kind of went, what do we do now? It was kind of like, whoa, in that. But some of the best ideas came out of that period. Some of the best programs actually came out of the early 2000s for the next 7 or 8 years, because people went, let's have a breather. Okay, what's important now? What's important? Now, in that situation, I wish we'd thought of that about 1997 would have been good, because you'd have prepared for post-2000. But we didn't actually do that at the time. I think sport just sat back, got through 2000, and then 2001 thought, oh, what the hell do we do now?
Yeah.
So, it was like that. But in these periods, there's been a real reassessment. And I, for one, have seen a greater collaboration and cooperation amongst people than ever before, in this way.
Yeah.
And it seems like some of the politics, it maybe talk about sports politics, and it seems that's kind of been, okay, well, that's the past. We need to get into this together. And I think that's a real positive thing. And that we can sort of address inclusion, diversity, and rethink it. So let's make this absolutely core. Bridie O'Donnell talked about that quite a bit, that this should be now, if any time in the whole history, this is the time now when we should be embedding this as core work, core business is inclusion, diversity. If we don't, we might not even survive this period, because we have to connect to the community that we're in. So attitude's vital.
Yeah, absolutely. We're having some great questions come through, actually. There's a couple on the concept of holding AGMs online, and you did mention the resource. Can you just quickly go through that again? And we might even, Darci, if it's okay, put up a little link to that, or certainly we can send through that afterwards. Do you want to quickly go through that, Pete?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There are a few resources online where they've conducted AGMs online. You have to look at, and this is just from my experience and listening to this, you have to look at some of the protocols and features you have in an online platform. For example, I don't think you could run it with this platform, because if you're going to run voting, which is possible, you need to be able to have breakout rooms and voting, and have an independent auditor who's taking those votes. I've actually did that a few years ago.
So Zoom might be a good platform for that then, for instance.
Zoom is really good for that, also because it's very cheap, if not free.
It's free, yeah.
But it does have breakout rooms and voting capacity. So I did that a few years ago with Women in Sport and Rec, who did their AGM because they've got bodies in every state and territory. They couldn't get together, which is like now, but geographically they couldn't get together. And they held their voting and AGM through a Zoom. It was actually through GoToMeeting at that time.
Yeah.
But it had polling, and it had I was the independent auditor type role.
Yeah.
So I took the votes in. Nobody could see them because I took them into private breakout rooms on the platform, and was able to relay back those results to the forum. So it is possible, but you have to really look carefully at the platform. I'll try and look up. I can't remember the name of the resource.
We can definitely shoot some stuff perhaps through later. But a really important point is that regional bowls managers, who are God's gift to bowling clubs, just quietly. They can help out clubs too with any questions around holding AGMs online too. So definitely, if you've still got questions about that, please, in clubland, please go to your regional bowls managers. So we have got a couple of other questions too. One is around the need, and we've had these questions considerably over the years, Pete. The need to actually have braille or touch signs in clubs for blind or vision impaired bowlers. Can you give us a very, very quick 1-minute response to that? Is there a need?
Yes. That's my response to it. Yeah, of course. Yeah. We've done a bit of work over the year, and there's various, organizations that can arrange that, and there's things like, different costs and everything else. But, there's done work over the years around symbols and use of visuals at clubs, and you cannot underestimate the importance of having really good visual symbols and alternatives in that way. So, and there's not a massive amount out there in terms of the symbols, but there are. If you look at some of the resources that Special Ed uses around BoardMaker and some others, Kathy, I'm sure.
I've got all those. I can definitely shoot them too. I think a really good point there though, Pete, is it's about increasing the visual capacity of signs. So not necessarily just with braille, but it might just be something really, really simple, like a picture as well as a sign, and those can all be done really, really low cost. And I guess the best way to go to, again, is to go to your regional bowls manager to be able to talk through, well, what are the specific needs of the people you are trying to either attract or you have in your club. So, don't always think braille and ramps, oh my God, it's going to cost me $150,000. No, it's simple stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I could go on about it, but there's a few years ago, I did some work in Finland, and I saw what the world could be in Finland. I was on a Churchill fellowship. I went to this place, the guy I known for a long time, and he'd worked with this college. And this college, you wouldn't believe, you'd open a drawer in the canteen and there'd be symbols in the drawer. On every door, there'd be smells, there'd be signs, there'd be lights. And he had spent years building this facility using visuals to direct people and instruct them, because there was a real mixture of people at this facility. There were people with really quite high support needs, and there were people with no support needs at all, and some massive diversity. And he was given the task of really adapting this facility. And the way he did it was through using symbols, which were everywhere and made no difference to everybody going in. Everybody loved it because it was also colourful and interesting. But it made a massive difference to how welcoming the environment was. It made a massive difference to how people accessed facilities. It was just a picture of what the world could be if we all did that. And Kathy is exactly right. It's not just about it is about that, but it's also about all the other types of symbols and visuals you can use to inform and educate and direct and everything else.
Yeah, it might even work with Darci after this to do some BoardMaker symbols on that, actually, because I've got that program on my computer. So that's a no cost stuff that we can put afterwards, if that's okay, Darci. We are coming to an end, which is, I feel like I'm going to cry. It's very sad, actually. Darci, can I, before we finish off, because I'm going to come back to you, Pete, with one pearl of wisdom. What's the most important pearl of wisdom to end with? But Darci, can I have the last PowerPoint the last couple of PowerPoints so we can quickly go through that? Because we did have some questions around funding as well, or some further work. So definitely, again, I'm going to plug the regional bowls managers. I love these guys, and they are the go-tos really for everything. A lot of stuff on the website that's great too. So Bowls Club Assist. Certainly, there's stuff on Sport and Rec website. The Play by the Rules website, as Peter mentioned before. You know, I've been doing this gig for a lot of years, and I get paid for it, and I still go there constantly to update my skills and knowledge. So, you know, it's the go-to. Local councils, local support organisations specific to that particular demographic are trying to attract. The website, so Sport Australia, Club Development, WA Sport and Rec, and New Zealand Sport New Zealand club kit. Give a plug to our mates across the ditch. And obviously for the COVID specific stuff, we did have a question from Gary Cantwell about that. There's some great stuff obviously on the Bowls Victoria website, but also the Volunteering Australia website has some return to sport stuff that is quite specific as well. So again, if you've got some other particular questions around the return to sport, your regional bowls managers would definitely be the ones to go and see. But last and not least, next PowerPoint please, Darci. There are many funding opportunities out there in terms of equipment or specific grants for, you know, including diversity, a more diverse and inclusive cohort at your club. All sorts of great small and large grants. And so if you want to keep on top of those, just go to the Vic Sport website. So vicsport.com.au/grants. They're all listed there. And what I would also recommend then is have a look at them, but also then have a chat to your regional bowls manager about actually doing the application, because it does take a bit of gubby speak sometimes to be able to write these damn grants. But, you know, they're the ones that are going to be able to help you too. Or there might be someone at your club that has government experience that'd be able to write a good grant application. But so that brings us to the end of this, and I do feel sad, and I do want to say a sincere thank you. But before I sign off, Pete Downs, can I have your one pearl of wisdom for those out in clubland?
Well, I might steal a quote that I've already used, because to me it kind of sums up the messages in the think tanks that came through, in every single one of them there. And it's from Professor Simone Fullager, and she said, if we only focus on managing the risk of disease, if we do all those busy things that we have to get back to playing and everything else, we face the risk of exacerbating inequalities and potentially worsening emotional well-being. So the message there is, let's look after each other in this period. It's very busy. There's lots of new stuff happening, but mental well-being and health is so important in this period for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think she summed it up pretty well.
Well, what a perfect way to end. And can I just say thank you so much for joining us, Pete. You're so busy and so fabulous. And yeah, we feel really privileged to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
And particularly a big shout out to Bowls Victoria, who are amazing clients to work with, and great staff, really, really good. So please, out there in Clubland, please go forward and, you know, please use the information in these webinars. Definitely always available to help out in any way, shape or form that you need. It has been a privilege and an absolute pleasure to be with you for 3 sessions. Thank you so much for everything you do for the community, and good luck.
And thank you to you as well, Kathy. You've been great. And to Josh Thornton and Tony Sherwell for joining us in the previous sessions. I'll get all those resources and everything out to you all by email as well. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.